Hello students, I Dr. Masroor Ahmed Beg, Principal Zakir Hussain, Delhi College would like to welcome you to this session on macroeconomic equilibrium. Through this session, I will explain the fundamentals of macroeconomic equilibrium and how it is maintained in an economy. All the topics included in this session are the notion of macroeconomic equilibrium, concept of short run equilibrium, using the ASAD strategy. An increase in aggregate demand, more spending causes a rise in macroeconomic equilibrium. Inflation, increased aggregate demand causes higher inflation. Macroeconomic equilibrium achieved through the SI method, full employment level of equilibrium, under employment level of equilibrium and equilibrium over full employment level. Concept of macroeconomic equilibrium. Number 1, short run equilibrium output. It is just a transient equilibrium level of output that is set at the time of ex ante aggregate demand. Ex ante aggregate demand. Ex ante aggregate demand for final goods in a two sector economy is the amount of ex ante consumption C and the investment I of final goods. Equilibrium condition. When aggregate demand equals aggregate supply and economy is in equilibrium, AD is made up of both consumption and investment spending. Aggregate supply or total output, on the other hand, reflects national income. Thus, in a two sector economy, equilibrium condition AD is equal to AS actually means Y is equal to C plus I. Symbolically, Y is equal to C plus I. Y is equal to alpha plus beta Y plus I. Y is equal to alpha plus I plus beta Y. Y is equal to A plus beta Y. Whatever firms produce is either consumed by households or invested by firms according to the equilibrium situation. In the economy, neither a surplus nor a deficit exists. Effective demand. Effective demand is the amount of aggregate demand needed to achieve full employment equilibrium. A more accurate term for aggregate demand at equilibrium is effective demand. The point where aggregate demand and aggregate supply are equal is where the equilibrium level of income and production is calculated. Meaning of voluntary and involuntary unemployment. Involuntary unemployment. It refers to a condition in which all capable people who are willing to work at the current wage rate are unable to find work. These people are physically and mentally capable of working and are willing to work for a reasonable wage, but they are unemployed. As a result, their unemployment is involuntary and they are compelled to work against their will. This form of unemployment is caused by a lack of adequate aggregate demand to ensure full employment. Voluntary unemployment. A person is said to be voluntary unemployed when is not willing to employed at the existing wage rates, although work is available. Voluntary unemployment is a national waste of human energy, but not a serious problem for the economy. Point number 2, long run equilibrium. The state of equilibrium is commonly suggested in terms of aggregate demand AT and aggregate supply AS. According to Keynesian theory, aggregate demand is the monetary value of an economy's total goods and services demanded for a given time span. Alternatively, it is the cumulative sum of money that all sectors of the economy are able to spend in an accounting year on the purchase of goods and services produced in the economy. As a consequence, it is a scheduled expenditure for the procurement of final goods and services. Aggregate demand comprises of two components. Consumption expenditure C correlates directly with income level, that is, consumption increases as revenue increases. Investment spending is considered to be independent of the amount of revenue, that is, the level of investment expenditure is independent. The money value of an economy's total supply of goods and services available for purchase over a given time is known as aggregate supply. Aggregate supply refers to an economy's overall output of goods and services as expressed in physical terms. To put it another way, aggregate supply is the total cost of all production produced in a given economy. It is shown by a 45-degree curve. Since earned income is either invested or saved, the AS curve is calculated by the curve of C plus S. An economy is in equilibrium when, for a given period of time, aggregate demand equals aggregate production for goods and services. So, equilibrium is attained when AD is equal to AS. We recognize that AD is the cumulative amount of consumption C and investment I. AD is equal to C plus I. AS is also the cumulative total of savings S and consumption C. So, AS is equal to C plus S. Substituting 2 and 3 in 1, we get C plus S is equal to C plus I or S is equal to I. This implies, according to Keynes, that there are two methods of determining the degree of representation in the economy between income and employment. Approaches for determination of equilibrium level. The two approaches to assessing the level of equilibrium between income, production and employment in the economy are as follows. Number 1, aggregate demand and aggregate supply approach, AD-AS approach. Number 2, saving and investment approach, S and I approach. Assumptions. It would be necessary to state all the various assumptions used in the determination of equilibrium production, but for now let us assume the following. Number 1, in the context of the two sector model, households and firms, the determination of equilibrium output should be analyzed. It means it is assumed that there is no government and foreign sector. 2, in principle, it is presumed that investment spending is independent of amount of revenue, that is, regardless of income. It is also assumed that investment is autonomous. Point number 3, this constant price level for all products is assumed. 4th, in the short run only the equilibrium output should be calculated. Aggregate demand and aggregate supply approach, AD-AS approach. According to Keynesian theory, the equilibrium level of national income is determined at a level where aggregate demand C plus I becomes equal to the level of aggregate supply total output. Here the term aggregate demand refers to the total desired spending on consumption and investment, whereas aggregate supply refers to the total supply of goods and services and represented by 45-degree line. The determination of equilibrium level of nation income is explained with the help of the given schedule and diagram. Thus, the AD curve in the study of income calculation is defined by the C plus I curve. The AD curve starts above the origin, because AD is the sum of consumption and investment, and consumption can never be 0. It has a positive slope, which indicates that the value of AD rises with the increase in income. It is parallel to consumption, as the difference between AD and consumption curve is investment, which is constant at all levels of income. Diagram number 1, aggregate demand and aggregate supply approach, AD AS approach. The curve of the AS is determined by the curve of C plus S, since the received income is either expended or saved. The AD or C plus I curve shows the optimum amount of spending by consumers and businesses relative to each level of income in the above diagram. At point E, the economy is in balance, where the 45-degree axis intersects the C plus I curve. E is the point of equilibrium, when the amount of desired consumption and expenditure is exactly equal to the level of total production at this stage. OY is the production equilibrium degree corresponding to point E. It is an optimal demand situation. Efficient demand refers to the sum of AD, which becomes efficient because it is equal to AS. If planned cost AD is greater than planned output AS, then the curve C plus I is above the 45-degree axis. This ensures that buyers and businesses together can buy more products than factories are entitled to make. As a consequence, the estimated inventory will fall below the amount desired. Companies must return to increasing jobs and productivity to get the stock up to the target level before the market is up at the OY export level, where AD becomes equal to AS and there is no other propensity to shift. If AD is less than AS, then the curve C plus I lies below the 45-degree axis. This suggests that buyers and enterprises together would buy less products than what factories would be able to manufacture. The expected inventory would increase as a consequence. In order to clear the unnecessary rise in inventory, businesses aim to limit jobs and production before the market returns to OI output stage, where AD becomes equal to AS and there is no other tendency to shift. To sum up, if there is some divergence from the production equilibrium stage, that is, the readjustment process will begin in the economy. If the planned investment AD is not equal to the estimated output AS, and before that level AD and AS are again equal, the output will appear to adjust up or down. Saving and investment approach, SI approach. According to this approach, the equilibrium level of income is determined at a level when planned savings are equal to planned investment. The equilibrium condition is explained with the help of given schedule and diagram. Diagram 2, saving and investment approach, SI approach. Due to the autonomous existence of investments, the investment curve I is parallel to the x axis in the given diagram. The saving curve S slopes upwards, which shows that saving often increases as income increases. At point E, at which the saving and investment curve cross each other, the economy is in balance. Ex ante spending at a point E is equivalent to ex ante investment. OY is the production equilibrium degree corresponding to point E. If planned saving is greater than planned investment, that is, it means that after point E in the diagram, households do not spend as much as the companies wished them to. As a consequence, the inventory grows above the amount desired. In order to clear the unnecessary spike in inventory, businesses must intend to decrease demand before saving and investment were equal to each other if the projected saving is less than the projected investment, that is before point E in the specified diagram. It indicates that households spend more and save less than what the businesses wanted them to. As a consequence, the expected inventory will collapse below the amount desired. Companies will aim to increase demand before saving and investment were equal to each other to get the inventory up to the target level. To conclude, if there is some divergence from the level of income equilibrium, that is, if the expected saving is not equal to the planned investment, a readjustment mechanism will begin and will push the economy back to the level of equilibrium. Equilibrium level according to classical economics, the degree of equilibrium of income is often achieved at the level of full employment, that is, there is no forced unemployment. As per the Keynesian principle, however, the degree of equilibrium can be reached at full employment level or underemployment amount, that is less than the level of full employment, or above the stage of full employment, that is higher than the level of full employment. Full employment level. Full employment equilibrium refers to the equilibrium where all resources in the economy are fully utilized. Alternatively, when equilibrium between AD and AF takes place at full employment of resources, it is called full employment equilibrium. There is no involuntary unemployment. Aggregate demand is just sufficient to ensure full utilization of all available resources. It also indicates that in such a situation, aggregate demand is neither in excess nor in deficient, but equal to supply at full employment level. The situation of full employment equilibrium is further explained as in given curve. Diagram 3. Full employment equilibrium, x axis measures the level of output and y axis measures aggregate demand. AS is expressed as 45-degree line, whereas the AD line represents aggregate demand. Both the curves intersect at point E, which yields full employment equilibrium, because aggregate demand is equal to full employment level of output at this point. Following propositions can be extracted from the above diagram. In the given diagram, E is the balance of full employment, since the aggregate production EQ is equal to supply OQ level of full employment. At the OQ level of production, all those willing to work at the prevailing wage rate are able to find jobs. That is, there is no involuntary unemployment. Situation of full employment does not mean a situation of zero unemployment, since there is still a tendency of natural unemployment. A condition of zero unemployment does not mean a situation of zero unemployment. This is due to the fact that the market supply and demand parameters are continuously evolving, and adapting to these changes takes time. As a result, full employment refers to a situation in which anyone who is willing to work at the current wage rates is able to find work. The natural rate of unemployment is the rate of unemployment that occurs in the economy at all times. Even though the labor market is in balance, it occurs mainly as a result of the time needed to transition from one job to another, as well as the time required to adapt to technological changes. Underemployment equilibrium at a degree of less than full work. Employment equilibrium implies that aggregate demand and aggregate supply are equivalent. It is a state of equilibrium in which aggregate demand is lower than supply at full employment. Alternatively, in generating the output, the economy's entire resource pool is not completely exploited, leaving certain resources idle. This condition is exacerbated by a lack of aggregate demand rather than a lack of aggregate supply. The following curve helps to clarify the state of underemployment equilibrium. Diagram 4, underemployment equilibrium. X axis measures the level of output and y axis measures aggregate demand. AS is expressed as 45-degree line, whereas the AD line represents aggregate demand. Both the curves intersect at point E, which yields full employment equilibrium, because aggregate demand is equal to full employment level of output at this point. But the underemployment equilibrium occurs at a point F, because actual AD curve, that is AD 1, intersects the same AS curve at F due to inadequacy of demand. Following propositions can be extracted from the above diagram. In the given diagram, AD 1 is equal to AS at point F, which is lower than full employment level, as OQ 1 is less than OQ point F signifies the underemployment equilibrium over full employment level. Over full employment equilibrium means equality between aggregate demand and aggregate supply at the level of higher than full employment. It is a state of equilibrium where level of aggregate demand is more than full employment level of output. Alternatively, in producing the output, economies all resources are fully utilized and there is no scope of increasing supply. As there is no further scope of increasing AS, the equilibrium at higher level cannot be achieved, which leads to inflationary situation in the market. The situation of over full employment equilibrium is explained with the help of the given curve. X axis measures the level of output and y axis measures aggregate demand. AS is expressed as 45-degree line, whereas AD line represents aggregate demand. Both the curve intersect at point E, which yields full employment equilibrium, because aggregate demand is equal to full employment level of output at this point, but the over full employment equilibrium occurs at point G, because actual AD curve, that is AD 1, intersect the same AS curve at G due to excess of demand. However, practically the supply cannot exceed over point E. Following propositions can be extracted from the above diagram. In the given figure, AD 1 is equal to AS at point G, that is greater than the level of full employment. Point G signifies the over full employment equilibrium. Diagram 5, over full employment equilibrium. This is the end of our session today. I hope that you have understood and at the same time enjoyed listening to today's session. Let us quickly recapitulate what we have discussed in today's session. It includes concept and idea of macroeconomic equilibrium, elaborate the idea and meaning of macroeconomic equilibrium, aggregate demand and aggregate supply approach of equilibrium, macroeconomic equilibrium through saving and investment approach, different types of equilibrium, that is full employment equilibrium, over employment equilibrium and under employment equilibrium. That is all for today. Hope you have understood. So, we will meet in the next episode. Till then, take care. Goodbye.